Mr. Hice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just say, last time I checked, the District of Columbia is in the United States, so I think the questions do speak for themselves. I'd like to build a little bit.
And so is the U.S. Virgin Islands, sir.
This is my time. I would like to build a little bit on Mr. Stubbe's line of questioning a little bit earlier, Mr. Secretary, and thank you again for being here. We all know in this room that there is ongoing civil litigation about the citizenship question on the 2020 census right now before the Supreme Court. Do you have any idea when the Supreme Court is scheduled to hear oral arguments?
I believe it's somewhere around the 21st of April.
That's correct. Somewhere in the 23rd, 6 weeks from now, more or less.
More or less 6 weeks.
So 6 weeks from now. Mr. Secretary, when the lower courts were considering the citizenship question, were you required to testify or were you deposed?
I was not testified. I was not deposed. The Supreme Court had issued what I believe is called a temporary stay that stayed any deposition or testimony by me.
That's the whole point of this. In fact, the fact that you were not required to testify in the lower court, that in itself became a matter of contention and drew its own separate civil litigation. And as you just referenced, the Supreme Court stepped in because that issue was so important. Literally, they plucked it out of the lower courts, and they themselves said that they wanted to weigh in on that. And as you just mentioned, the Supreme Court placed a stay on you. This is what's so amazing me about this whole hearing today. The Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, has said Mr. Ross should not be deposed or give testimony on this matter until after they are able to decide on this matter. And it's alarming to me the willingness of this committee to disregard the wishes of the Supreme Court. And for all practical purposes, you are sworn in today. For all practical purposes, this is a deposition. Do you think it's reasonable to suspect that some plaintiffs involved in this case are possibly watching this today?
I have no idea who's watching it today, sir.
We don't know who is watching, but I think it's kind of reasonable to assume that those who are involved in this case are probably watching, which would make this, in essence, part of the discovery process. And so here we are virtually in a deposition going against the wishes of the U.S. Supreme Court. And, you know, I just look at the direction of this committee. 2 weeks ago, we have Michael Cohen here, an individual convicted of lying to Congress, coming back to give more testimony to Congress, and appears in every way that he lied again while he was here. And now we're having a hearing, in essence a deposition, going against the wishes of the Supreme Court. It just seems like this committee is, this whole hearing is inappropriate and out of order, and I would like to yield the remainder of my time to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Secretary, I want to come to you. Over the past 100 years, prior to 2010, when President Obama decided not to include a citizenship question on the census, the prior 100 years, was there not a citizenship question on each of those censuses that were taken between 1910 and 2000?
Yes, sir. I believe that is the case, that it was routinely asked in one form or another.
Are you aware that there were 5 Democrat presidents that controlled what was going on the census and 5 Republican presidents that controlled what was going on the census during that same time period, so it was not partisan?
Yeah, I haven't tried to make this a partisan event, sir, so I haven't kept track of which presidents did what.
Well, that speaks well to the way that you're looking at this. One last question that I have for you. On the American Community Survey, there is a citizenship question that we currently ask each and every year to about 1% of the population. Is it correct that the most unanswered question on there is not about citizenship, but about their income?
if memory serves, on some of those surveys, the largest non-response rate, certainly a larger